The Colosseum is one of the most iconic structures in the world, a symbol of ancient power, spectacle, and imperial ambition. A monument that has sparked wonder for centuries, and to this day, lives on as a glimpse into the past, inspiring books, movies, and pop culture. But back in 80 AD, the Colosseum wasn't just a ruined monument or bucket list photo op. It was a brand new, state-of-the-art entertainment venue like no other. And to break it in, Emperor Titus kicked off 100 straight days of games, exotic animals, grisly public displays, and legendary gladiator combat that would shape the perspective of the Roman world for centuries. Today we're taking a look back at the Colosseum's opening act, the first 100 days that really set the tone for the Roman Empire. Blood, spectacle, and empire. Construction of the Colosseum, officially known as the Flavian Amphitheater, began around 70 AD under Emperor Vespasian, the first of the Flavian emperors. Unlike other entertainment arenas around Rome, such as the Circus Maximus, which was on the city's outskirts, the Colosseum was constructed in the center of the ancient city. This was made possible by the infamous Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which reduced 10 of the city's 14 districts to ashes. This horrifying calamity occurred under the reign of Emperor Nero. Rather than rebuilding for the people of Rome, claimed the space for himself to build an impossibly elaborate and grand palace known as the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. However, Nero wouldn't get much time to enjoy his fancy palace, as he would be ousted from power in 68 AD, launching Rome into yet another civil war. The man to emerge victorious from this period, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, was Vespasian. Vespasian spent the next decade establishing the legitimacy of his new Flavian dynasty, restoring traditional Roman values, and cleaning up the mess left by Nero and his predecessors. Part of his plan to get Rome back on its feet and heading in the right direction was to get the Roman people in his favor. In 72 AD, Vespasian put on a grand triumph for his son and eventual successor, Titus, in honor of his successful war to put down the Jewish revolt. As part of this triumph, Vespasian pledged to use the spoils of war to build a brand new amphitheater in Rome to host public entertainment, providing the people with the bread and circuses they so craved. To reinforce the idea of himself as a generous patron to the people of Rome, he tore down Nero's Golden Palace to make space for the stadium, returning the land to the people. Vespasian himself would never get to see the amphitheater in its full glory, as he would die in 79 AD, with the Colosseum only 3/4 of the way finished. Upon taking the throne, Emperor Titus swiftly completed the construction of the Colosseum in around 80 or 81 AD, depending on the source. When it was dedicated, the Colosseum was officially known as the Amphitheatrum Caesarum, but it would later commonly be called the Colosseum, due to its proximity to a colossal statue of Nero as the sun god's soul, which was later rebranded to basically just the sun god's soul. They kind of ditched the whole Nero thing. To celebrate the grand opening, Titus ordered 100 days of glorious, bloody Roman games. The timing for these extravagant games was key, as Titus had developed a bit of a reputation as a less than popular hard-ass while serving as Praetorian Perfect under his father. The games served not only as a way to improve Roman civic morale, but also to boost Titus's popularity among the plebeians. On top of that, the Roman people were in desperate need of a pick-me-up, since yet another great fire had burned Rome earlier in 80 AD, and Mount Vesuvius had erupted the year prior in 79 AD, destroying Pompeii and several Italian cities. The Romans were desperate for a little R&R. So what could the average Roman expect from a day at the games? First off, not everyone would have been able to attend. While the Colosseum seated an impressive 60 to 80,000 people if you really packed the nosebleeds, the population of Rome at the time was well over 1 million. And on top of that, the promised spectacle would certainly have attracted tourists from outside the capital. Senators, rich nobles, and other citizens of importance would have had their seats reserved, much like modern-day season ticket holders. However, other folks wishing to get in on the action would have had to obtain their tickets by lottery, not unlike students at SEC schools today hoping to secure seats for hot ticket rivalry games. Tickets were free of charge for the lucky few who received them. Usually they were made out of wood, terracotta, or bronze. They directed the holder to the right entrance for their seat. Even with the ticket in hand, not all spectators were equal in Roman eyes. Seating in the Colosseum was a mirror of Roman society, rigid, hierarchical, and unforgiving. At the north end of the arena, the emperor had his own private luxury box that provided him with a great view of the action, and the crowd an equally important great view of him. Closest to the action sat the senators and other elite nobles, lounging on cushioned marble seats. Some even had their names carved into the stone. Just behind them were the equestrians, wealthy citizens without the level of political clout of the senators. Further up, the commoners crammed into stone seats exposed to the hot Mediterranean sun, where the view might not have been the best, but where the atmosphere was electric. This is where the real die-hard fans sat. And at the very top, in the nosebleeds, on creaking wooden bleachers, sat Rome's poor, its slaves, and its women, banished to the shadows of the amphitheater, unless of course they were Vestals, who due to their religious significance, were the lone women who could sit up front and center. It was kind of like if nuns had VIP seating ringside at every UFC event. On their way in, spectators walked past impressive statues, colorful reliefs, and carved messages, or as some might say, propaganda, of the greatness of the Flavian dynasty. A day at the games would have been a full day affair of brutal fun for the whole family. The day usually started with the animal spectacles. According to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, over 9,000 wild and tamed animals appeared in the inaugural games. Thankfully, PETA wasn't around back then, so they were good to go. These animal battles and hunts, known as ventories, involved pretty much every animal the Romans could get their hands on, from massive elephants to the humble crane. Now, I don't think a crane would have put up much of a fight, but nevertheless, the Romans ate it up. It was like a twisted version of Noah's Ark. Animals were shipped in from across the empire. Lions, leopards, tigers, hares, pigs, bulls, bears, wild boars, rhinos, buffaloes, crocodiles, ostriches, and even hippos. Animals often fought one another, tigers mauling lions, elephants running over bulls, all to the delight of spectators. One of the most memorable animals unleashed before Roman audiences was the rhinoceros. The Roman poet Martial, who was in attendance during the inaugural games, writes about his frustration as the rhino just sat there doing nothing. Then suddenly it was stirred into a wild rage and started tossing bulls into the air with its horn, goring them as they came down. Specific gladiators, called bestiaries, usually slaves or criminals, entered the arena to do battle with beasts, hoping to gain glory or freedom. One such man was named Carporius, who reportedly slew bears, boars, leopards, lions, and allegedly took down 20 animals in a single morning hunt. But it wasn't all fun and games, as most bestiary gladiators didn't have Carporius' Herculean skills. Damneo a bestias, or condemnation of beast, was a form of capital punishment in which condemned people were killed by wild animals, usually vicious lions or other big cats. The animal spectacles served not only as entertainment for the masses, but as a display of Roman dominance. The Romans wanted to show that not only did they control an empire and millions of people, but nature itself. Martial recounts a particularly unbelievable episode in which an untrained elephant, seemingly on its own accord, turned and bowed before the emperor. Martial implies that the animal could feel the power and divinity of the emperor. The reality is that the animal was probably trained, but this added yet another layer to the spectacle, and of course the emperor probably ate this up. As the animal festivities came to an end and the sun was at its highest, the focus of the games shifted to the midday festivities. The always a good time, no alcohol required, public executions. This would be the hottest part of the day, and many of the senators and other nobles would break for lunch, including the emperor, who traditionally left during the executions, viewing them as beneath his status. Historian Suetonius even criticized the Emperor Claudius for routinely staying to watch executions during the pre-Colosseum games. Emperor Titus certainly would have been aware of this precedent, and eager to set a good example, would have certainly not been present during the executions at the inaugural games. The executions were a grim affair, as deserters, prisoners of war, and criminals from lower classes were disposed of by means of crucifixion or other gruesome methods, such as mauling by wild animals, as mentioned earlier. In a fact that is interestingly twisted, sometimes theater was added to the executions to spice things up, as if mass crucifixions and animal maulings weren't engaging enough. These executions often took the form of reenactments of tragic scenes from mythology, with the condemned cast in the role of the doomed character. In one such recreation, Prometheus, whose liver was devoured daily by an eagle, was represented by a criminal, while a ravenous wild boar played the part of an eagle. The man was strapped to a rock, and the boar came out and ripped his entrails out. Another fan favorite was the punishment of Orpheus, who in myth was torn apart by a group of wild female followers of Dionysus, the Maeonids. In the arena, the women were replaced by hungry bears, gruesome, theatrical, and ruthlessly efficient. These midday executions were more than punishment. They were a poignant reminder to the masses of Rome's power, and a midday matinee no one dared to miss. Another form of entertainment popular in Rome was the Naumachia, reenactments of famous naval battles. In the previous 100 years, several purpose-built theaters capable of being flooded had been constructed for this very purpose. The most famous was an artificial lake made by Augustus, called the Naumachia Augusti. Writing about Titus's games, Cassius Dio says that the Naumachia were present in both Augustus's maritime arena and in the Colosseum during the opening games. Suetonius says they took place on an artificial lake, but gives no further details. He does mention that the stadium where they were held was flooded and drained on the same day. These suggest that the shows probably took place in Augustus's artificial lake arena, which was designed for this very purpose. However, some archaeological evidence suggests that the Colosseum also may have had this capability. If that was the case, smaller scaled-down boats would have been used. These boats had flat bottoms so they could stand upright in the shallow water, and would not have been able to ram each other, as they could not build up enough speed like the larger ships that would have been used on the artificial lakes. The evidence points to the Naumachia Augusti being the primary location for these naval shows, and in all likelihood the Colosseum only hosted such events a handful of times, its opening 100 days likely being one of them. While some of these Naumachia shows may have happened in the afternoon, most afternoons were reserved for the true main event of the day, the extremely popular gladiatorial bouts. Long before the Colosseum rose from the rubble of Nero's Golden Palace, the blood sport of gladiatorial combat had already captivated the Roman imagination and become a favorite pastime. What began centuries earlier as solemn funeral rites, where slaves or prisoners of war were forced to fight to honor the dead, evolved into one of the empire's most beloved spectacles. By the time of the Flavian dynasty, gladiators had become icons of strength, endurance, and even celebrities. Though most were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, some volunteered for a chance at glory and prize money, which could lead to freedom. These fighters were trained in specialized schools, enduring brutal regiments to master weapons, tactics, and showmanship, which was a very important part of their job. The largest of these, the Ludus Magnus, sat just east of the Colosseum and connected directly to the arena by an underground tunnel. Not all gladiators, though, were created equal. In fact, the arena was a carefully curated battlefield of contrasting styles and strategies, each gladiator type designed to clash in a brutal dance of strengths and weaknesses that kept the audience on edge. Each type of gladiator, in part, was inspired by Rome's real military enemies: Greek hoplites, Thracian rebels, even Celtic charioteers. Rome turned its conquered foes into entertainment. The Colosseum essentially became a symbolic space where Rome's past wars were fought again and again, this time for sport and entertainment. If you want a deeper dive into all the different types of gladiators, I'm putting together a separate breakdown that goes into each one. It's either already linked here or is coming out shortly, so stay tuned or check it out. But now back to the action. Details of most gladiatorial combats are not recorded. Suetonius writes that they were lavish, and Cassius notes that there were both single combats and fights between groups of gladiators. But the countless battles fought during the inaugural days, only one account has survived the centuries, etched into history not for its bloodshed, but for its balance, its honor, and its interesting outcome. Martial, who again was present at the opening games, gives us just a single account: a duel between gladiators named Verus and Priscus. Both were experienced fighters, hardened by the arena, veterans of countless matches. Their weapons gleamed under the Roman sun, their armor battered but intact. What unfolded between them wasn't just a fight, it was a war of equals. Blow for blow, strike for strike. Neither man gave ground. But here's what many people get wrong about gladiator combat, mostly due to the way it's portrayed in movies and video games. Most fights didn't end in death. Gladiators were valuable investments. They were trained professionals, often owned by wealthy sponsors. Owners of gladiator schools spent time and money developing them. A dead gladiator meant a lost asset. While death could come, and certainly did in many fights, it wasn't by default. Even the best gladiator in the world couldn't draw money for his patron from beyond the grave. Some gladiators, like Verus and Priscus, even achieved a fame akin to that of modern-day celebrities or sports athletes. Their names were known, their faces etched on pottery, their victories praised in graffiti across the city. They had fans, some even had groupies, and some even received gifts and favors from the elite. But behind every fight was a web of money, training, and reputation. Gladiator schools competed for prestige. Patrons bet fortunes on the outcome. A victory could raise a school's status, a loss could sink it. As Verus and Priscus continued to fight, the crowd roared. Time and time again, they begged for a decision, but the men were equally matched. It was time for Emperor Titus to step in and make a decision. The crowd expected Titus to hold to tradition. Victory must only be granted to one, or so they thought. And then in a move that stunned the audience and broke precedent, Titus did something that no emperor had done before. He declared both men victors for their honorable performance. The arena erupted. Not only were their lives spared, they were freed. Each was awarded part of a rudis, the wooden sword or staff that symbolized retirement and freedom. This wasn't mercy for mercy's sake, it was political theater. Titus had shown clemency and sent everyone home happy. Martial praises Titus for this act of wisdom, writing, "Under no prince before did we ever see that two should fight and both should victors be." In that one match, the Colosseum wasn't just a stage for violence, it became a stage for honor. The emperor had elevated the fight beyond blood and spectacle into legend. And just when you thought a day at the Colosseum couldn't get any better, out came the Roman version of the t-shirt cannon. Emperor Titus had wooden balls tossed into the crowd, each one inscribed with a prize. Some promised food, fine clothing, or other ornate prizes. If you were really lucky, your prize might even be a horse, a head of cattle, or a brand new slave. Anyone who caught one of these prize balls could take it to an official and exchange it for the gift written on it. It was great fun, generosity, and great imperial PR, all rolled into one. Titus made sure that people left entertained, full, and maybe even a little richer. The inaugural games of the Colosseum were a smashing success. Well, that is, unless you were one of the 9,000 animals or countless human lives lost in the name of entertainment. But regardless, the games set a new standard in Rome. They weren't just about blood sport, it was political theater, propaganda, and a public relations masterpiece for the Flavian dynasty. The empire's might was on full display. The emperor's generosity was unmistakable. And the values of Roman society, violence, order, and ambition, were clear as day. On the final day of the games, Emperor Titus is said to have wept openly in front of the crowd, and according to Cassius Dio, he died the very next day. Whether sheer coincidence or symbolism, it's a fitting final act for an emperor whose name is forever tied to one of Rome's greatest landmarks. From wild beasts to roaring crowds, the inaugural games of the Colosseum remain one of the most over-the-top and unforgettable events in all of history. And even now, the Colosseum stands as a reminder of all that, of Rome's power, its priorities, and the complicated legacy it left behind. So that'll do it. If you enjoyed yourself, go ahead and give the video a like, comment with what you would have wanted to see most at the Colosseum, and if you enjoy history videos, stuff like this, go ahead and subscribe to History, Legends, and Lore. I appreciate it greatly. And as always, take it easy and have a great day.